Soraya had not meant to hear it. She had come to bring him the tea he liked before bed, the one brewed with rowan bark and wild honey, the one she prepared with her own hands, because no servant in the fortress knew the balance the way she did. The stone corridor outside the Alpha King's war chamber was empty at this
They've
hour,
crossed the river, Your
torchlight
Majesty.
throwing long
The Northern
shadows
Lords
across the
demand
ancient
action.
walls,
We
and the
must
door stood
mobilize the
open
legions
just
before the
wide
winter
enough for
sets in.
voices to slip through like blades. She recognized Kale's voice first, his beta, the one whose loyalty to the crown was carved so deep it bordered on worship. The Northern Lords are pressing again, Kale was saying. Varenth of House Delvain has put his daughter forward. Officially this time, a formal petition to the Elder Council. Let him petition. Draen's voice, low and unhurried, the way it always was when he discussed politics. The same voice that turned soft as rainfall when he whispered her name in the dark. The council can entertain whatever fantasies they wish. This is not a fantasy, my king. Varenth commands 6,000 swords and controls every grain shipment through the Grey March Pass. If you refuse his daughter publicly, he will take it as an insult. And an insulted Delvain is a dangerous Delvain. A pause. The sound of liquid being poured. Then Draen spoke again, and his tone had shifted into something Soraya had never heard before. Something careless. Something cold. Kale, I have told you. I will manage the Northern Lords in my own time, in my own way. As for the question of a queen, there is no urgency. With respect, there is every urgency. You have no heir, no formal mate. The packs grow restless. They need stability. A queen beside you, a bloodline secured. You cannot keep what? The edge in Draen's voice could have drawn blood. Say it plainly. Kyle hesitated. Then, quieter. You cannot keep a commoner in your bed and call it destiny, Draen. The packs will not accept her. You know this. Soraya's fingers tightened around the clay cup. The tea sloshed, scalding her thumb. She did not feel it. Soraya is not a political concern, Draen said. And there it was. Her name spoken not with tenderness, not with the reverence he showed when they were alone, but with the flat dismissal of a man sorting a minor inconvenience into its proper drawer. She is mine. She has always been mine. And she will remain mine regardless of what the council demands or Varenth threatens. And if the council forces a choosing? If you are compelled to take a proper mate from the bloodline houses? Draen laughed. The sound was quiet, almost amused, almost bored. Then I will do what is required in public and keep what is mine in private. Soraya is not going anywhere, Kale. She would never leave me. The woman is devoted beyond reason. I could take 10 queens and she would still be waiting in my chambers when the ceremonies ended. The words struck Soraya's chest with the force of arrows fired at close range. She would never leave me. Not spoken with gratitude, not spoken with awe at the depth of her love. Spoken with the certainty of a man who owned something and saw no reason to protect what could not be lost. The woman is devoted beyond reason, as if her devotion were a leash. As if her love were a cage she had built around herself, and he had simply noted how secure the lock was. I could take 10 queens and she would still be waiting. The teacup slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the stone floor, and the sound was so small, so insignificant compared to the destruction happening inside her, that she almost laughed. Almost. Soraya turned from the door before either man could investigate the noise. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold stone as she walked, then ran, then fled through the corridors of Ashenir Fortress, the seat of the Alpha King's power, the place where she had given everything she had to a man who considered her devotion a foregone conclusion. 6 months. She had loved him for 6 months in secret, slipping through hidden passages to reach his chambers, learning the geography of his scars with her fingertips. He had bitten her on the soft skin below her collarbone, the claiming mark wolves reserved for their fated mates, and she had worn it like a sacred thing. He had made promises in the dark. He would announce her when the time was right. He would silence the council with the truth of their bond. He would make her his queen. She had believed every word. And now she understood what those words had truly been. Not promises, assurances. The kind a man offers when he is so certain of his possession that he sees no cost in generosity. Soraya reached her small chamber in the eastern wing, the modest room assigned to her as the fortress healer, and pressed her back against the door. Her breath came in ragged pulls. Her vision blurred and cleared and blurred again. Her hand moved to the claiming mark on her chest, still burning against her skin. It pulsed with warmth, the way it always did when her emotions ran high, the bond itself reaching for him, trying to tell him something was wrong. She would not let it. Her other hand moved lower, settling on the small curve of her belly. 3 months. She had confirmed it weeks ago with the same herbs she used to diagnose the village women who came to her for help. A child. His child. The heir that Kale had just told him the kingdom desperately needed. She had planned to tell him tonight, had rehearsed the words while brewing his tea, imagining the way his amber eyes would widen, the way his hands would tremble the way they always did when something pierced the armor he wore for the rest of the world. Now those words would never be spoken, because Soraya understood something with brutal clarity, standing in her tiny room with his mark burning on her chest and his child quickening in her womb. If she told him about the baby, he would keep her. Not because he loved her, because she was useful, because an heir was a political asset, and a devoted woman carrying that asset was the most convenient arrangement a king could ask for. She would become the permanent secret, the hidden room, the woman who existed only in shadows while queens walked in sunlight. No. Soraya began to pack. The fortress slept. Guards patrolled the outer walls in their predictable rotations, 4 minutes between each pass along the eastern rampart, a gap she had memorized months ago when she first began sneaking to Draen's chambers after dark. The irony tasted like ash on her tongue. The same knowledge that had carried her to him would now carry her away. She moved through the servants' corridor with a single leather satchel over her shoulder. 2 dresses. Her mother's bone-handled knife, a pouch of dried silverleaf and yarrow for the nausea that struck every morning like clockwork. Everything else she left behind, including the silk robe Draen had given her, the one that smelled like cedar and smoke, and him. Leaving it was the hardest thing she had ever done. She had crossed the Thornvale at 16 with nothing but her healing gift and the hope that someone would value what she could offer. She had found that someone, and he had valued her exactly the way she feared, as something owned, not someone cherished. The eastern gate was unguarded during the shift change. Soraya slipped through the narrow gap between iron and stone, the winter air hitting her face like a slap. The fortress of Ashenir rose behind her, its black towers clawing at a sky thick with stars. Somewhere in that fortress, in the chambers at the top of the highest tower, Draen slept without knowing that the ground beneath his certainty had already crumbled. She allowed herself one look back, one breath, one moment to feel the full weight of what she was leaving. Then the claiming mark flared with sudden searing heat. Soraya gasped, pressing her palm flat against it. Through the pain, she felt something she had never experienced before, a pull, sharp and desperate, as if the bond itself was trying to drag her backward, to reel her back through the gate and up the stairs and into the arms of the man who had reduced her love to a certainty he never had to earn. She gritted her teeth and walked forward into the dark. Behind her, in the highest tower of Ashenir, a wolf stirred in his sleep. His hand reached across the bed toward warmth that was no longer there. His fingers closed on empty sheets. And deep in his chest, in the place where the bond lived like a second heart, something cracked. He did not wake. Not yet. But his wolf did, and the howl that tore from his throat in sleep raw and jagged and full of a grief he could not yet name, echoed across the frozen valley until every wolf within 5 miles lifted its head and trembled. By the time the sun rose over Ashenir, Soraya was already gone, and the Alpha King's unshakable certainty was about to become the most dangerous lie he had ever told himself. 4 months had passed since the night Soraya walked through the eastern gate of Ashenir, and the village of Brindell had already forgotten to be curious about her. She had arrived in the depths of winter, half frozen, with a story about a dead husband and a child on the way. The village sat in a valley between two ridges of the Calarith Mountains, so remote that traders came only twice a season and news from the capital arrived weeks late, if it arrived at all. The kind of place where a woman with healing hands and a quiet voice could disappear into the rhythm of daily life without leaving a ripple. The elders had given her the stone cottage near the river in exchange for tending the sick. She had accepted without negotiation. Within a month, the people of Brindell knew her only as Nella, the healer who spoke softly and never asked questions about anyone else's past, which made them extend her the same courtesy. She delivered 3 babies that winter. She drew infection from a logging wound that would have cost a man his arm. She brewed tonics for fevers and wrapped poultices for frostbitten fingers, and sat beside an old woman's bed for 2 nights straight until the crisis passed. The work steadied her, gave her days a shape that grief alone could not provide. But the nights were hers, and the nights were merciless. Every evening, after the last patient had gone and the fire had burned to embers, Soraya lay in her narrow bed, with both hands pressed to her growing belly, and felt the child move inside her. The movements had grown stronger over the weeks, insistent, the baby impatient to arrive. Sometimes she spoke to it in whispers, telling it stories about a world she was no longer part of. She never spoke its father's name. The claiming mark below her collarbone had not faded. Among wolfkind, a rejected bond was supposed to dissolve within weeks, the mark lightening to nothing, the connection severing clean as a cut rope. Soraya had watched for the signs every morning, pressing her fingers to the scar tissue, waiting for the day it would smooth into ordinary skin and release her. It never did. If anything, the mark had grown darker, the edges more defined, as though the bond was deepening rather than dying. Some nights it burned with a low, persistent heat that kept her from sleep. Some nights she swore she could feel something reaching through it, a presence vast and restless, searching the dark like a hand sweeping across an empty bed. She told herself it was phantom pain, memory playing tricks on a broken heart. She told herself a great many things in those 4 months. None of them stopped the ache. The trader arrived on a morning bright with spring sun. Ossian, a wiry man who traveled the mountain routes between the capital and the border settlements, had brought something more valuable than the lamp oil and bandage cloth Soraya had come for. He had brought news. "The Alpha King has lost his mind," Ossian announced to the small crowd gathered around his wagon. "Completely, utterly mad." Soraya's hand froze on a bolt of linen. 6 provinces reporting crop failures, wolves attacking livestock in broad daylight. The king's guard deployed to villages, searching house by house for some woman nobody can identify. "What woman?" asked Hesta, the baker's wife, who collected gossip the way other women collected herbs. "No name, no description beyond sealed orders. But the Alpha King has offered 15,000 gold crowns for information leading to her." Ossian leaned forward. "They say his wolf has taken over, that he shifts without warning, that even his own beta has been seen with fresh scars." "Perhaps she stole something," Hesta suggested. "Or perhaps the king cannot accept that someone had the audacity to leave him." She paid for her supplies and walked back to her cottage on legs that felt borrowed from someone else. Inside, she pressed her palms flat against the table to stop them shaking. He was searching for her, tearing his kingdom apart to find a healer with no bloodline and no name. Why? She had heard him say the words herself. She would never leave me. If she was nothing more than a convenience, why would her absence drive him to madness? Unless she had misunderstood something that night. Soraya pressed her hand to the mark on her chest. It was burning again, hotter than it had in weeks, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her own hammering heart. And beneath the heat, faint but unmistakable, she felt the thing she had been trying to deny for 4 months. Him, not a memory, not a phantom, a living presence, pressing against the edges of the bond with a desperation so raw it made her eyes sting. She pulled her hand away as if the mark had scorched her. No, she had heard what she had heard. She had made her choice. And false hope was a poison she could not afford. Not now. Not with a child depending on every decision she made. But long after the sun had set and the cottage had gone dark, Soraya lay awake with her hand on her belly and her mark burning like a coal against her skin, and she could not stop the single thought that circled her mind like a wolf pacing the edge of a cage. What if I was wrong? 3 days after the trader's visit, the wolves came. Soraya spotted them at dusk. 4 massive wolves at the edge of the birchwood, their coats ranging from russet to pale ash, standing in a perfect line and watching her cottage with eyes that held far too much intelligence. She backed away from the window, one hand pressed to her stomach, the other reaching for the fire poker. The baby kicked sharply. The child could sense what those wolves meant. The claiming mark erupted with heat so intense that Soraya cried out. She doubled over, gripping the back of a chair as the sensation flooded through her body. This was nothing like the dull burn she had grown accustomed to. This was a wildfire, consuming and vast, and buried within it she could feel emotions that were not her own. Fury, exhaustion, and a longing so deep it had no bottom. He was close. A knock at the door. Not the heavy, splintering pound of soldiers forcing entry, but 3 measured strikes. Patient, almost polite. Nella? A male voice she did not recognize. My name is Corvin. I serve the Alpha King. I am alone at your door, and I give you my word that I mean you no harm. Soraya stared at the door. Her grip tightened on the fire poker. I know your name is not Nella. I know who you are. And there are things you must hear before it is too late. Something in the man's voice, a weariness earned over months of hard travel, made her hesitate. The mark was burning so fiercely she could barely think. Soraya opened the door with the poker raised. The man was perhaps 50, lean, with close-cropped gray hair and deep lines around his mouth. He wore the king's dark leather, but it was travel-worn and patched. His gaze dropped to the poker, then to her belly, then back to her face. Relief flooded his expression. Thank the old wolves, he breathed. You are alive. That depends on why you are here, Soraya said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. If you have come to drag me back to Ashenir, I have come to save your life. Corvin's eyes were steady. May I come inside? What I have to tell you cannot be spoken on a doorstep where anyone might hear. Soraya weighed her options. The wolves at the tree line had not moved. Running was impossible this far along in the pregnancy, with 4 shifted wolves waiting in the birchwood. And if this man had intended violence, he would not have knocked. She stepped aside. Corvin entered alone. He took in the cottage with a single sweep, the drying herbs on their hooks, the neatly arranged jars, the narrow bed, the fire burning low in the hearth, and something in his face tightened with what looked like sorrow. You built a life here, he said quietly. I built what I needed to survive. Say what you came to say. Corvin sat in the chair she gestured toward. He placed his hands on his knees and looked at her with the expression of a man about to deliver a wound. The night you left Ashenir, he began, the conversation you overheard between the king and Kyle. You heard Draen say that you would never leave him, that you were devoted beyond reason, that he could take 10 queens and you would remain. Soraya flinched. Hearing the words repeated, spoken aloud in her small, safe cottage, was like having the original wound reopened with a clean blade. How do you know what I heard? Because I was there, in the corridor behind you. I am the king's spy master, Soraya. It is my purpose to know what happens in every shadow of that fortress. Corvin paused. What you heard that night was not what you think it was. I know what I heard. You know the words, not the context. Corvin leaned forward. Cale had been pressing Drayan for weeks to consider a political marriage. Drayan was being backed into a corner. What you heard was him performing for Cale, giving his beta the answer that would stop the pressure, buying time to find a way to announce you without triggering civil war. Performing, Soraya repeated. Badly. Drayan is a gifted strategist and an abysmal liar. His actual plan was to present you to the Elder Council at the Summer Summit with the claiming mark as proof of a fated bond. A fated bond cannot be overruled by politics. Corvin paused. He had already begun drafting the formal declaration. Your name is on it. Queen of Ashenir, bound by fate and sacred mark. Soraya sank into the chair. Her legs had stopped working. His greatest failure, Corvin said softly, was not realizing that the woman he loved needed to hear the truth from him, not the performance he was giving everyone else. The room swam. 4 months of grief built on a conversation she had walked into at the worst possible moment. Why did he not come after me? She whispered. He tried. Shifted and ran the morning he found you gone. Tracked your scent for 2 days before it vanished at the river crossing. You covered your trail well. His own scouts taught me tracking when I was treating their injuries. Corvin almost smiled. That irony has not been lost on him. The smile vanished. But there is more. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of parchment. The seal was broken, but Soraya could see the impression stamped into dark green wax, a coiled serpent wrapped around a mountain peak, the crest of House Delvain. We intercepted this from a courier 4 days ago, Corvin said, holding the letter out to her. Soraya took it. Her eyes moved across the words, and with each line, the blood retreated further from her face. The healer has been located in a mountain settlement east of the Calareth Ridge. Varenth has authorized termination before the summer summit. No witnesses, no trace. The king's obsession dies with her, and our daughter takes her rightful place. Long live Queen Miravel. The parchment trembled in Soraya's hands. Assassins, she said. The word came out flat, hollow. Delvain assassins. Varenth has had scouts searching for you almost as long as Drayan has. But where Drayan searched to find you, Varenth searches to bury you. Corvin leaned closer. They know about Brindel Soraya. They know about Nella the healer. And according to our intelligence, the kill team was dispatched 5 days ago. Soraya's hand moved to her belly. The baby was still now, terribly still, holding its breath. How long do I have? If they are traveling on foot through the mountain passes, 2 days, perhaps less. Corvin stood. Drayan is a day's ride behind me. He is coming, Soraya. I could not stop him even if I wanted to. The bond is pulling him to you like a compass needle swinging north. But the Delvains may reach you before he does. Then I run again. You cannot. You are 7 months along. The passes are half frozen. And this time, they will not stop until they find a body. He paused. There is something else. Drayan is not well. Soraya thought of the traitor's words. The Alpha King has lost his mind. The bond was never meant to stretch this far without completion. His wolf has been fighting for dominance since you left. Cale can barely keep him in human form. 3 advisors have resigned out of fear. Corvin's voice dropped. If the bond is not completed soon, he will lose himself to the wolf permanently, and a feral alpha with his power would be a catastrophe for every pack in the kingdom. The mark below her collarbone pulsed, and through it, for just a moment, Soraya felt him. Not the arrogant king who had spoken of her devotion like a man counting coins, not the careless voice that had shattered her world, but the man beneath all of that, exhausted, terrified, reaching through the dark with everything he had left, searching for the heartbeat that matched his own, searching for her. A sound from outside shattered the moment. Not a knock this time. A howl rising from the birchwood, sharp and urgent and laced with warning. Corvin was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the blade at his hip. "That is not one of ours," he said. Through the window, Soraya saw the 4 wolves at the tree line spin toward the forest behind them. New shapes were moving between the birch trunks. Darker, faster, and they were not watching. They were hunting. The first arrow came through the window like a wasp made of steel. It buried itself in the wall behind Soraya's head, close enough that she felt the wind of its passing across her cheek. The shaft was black, fletched with dark feathers, and the tip glistened with something wet and oily that was not blood. Poison. Corvin seized her arm and hauled her below the window line as a second arrow punched through the wooden shutters and embedded in the floor where she had been standing. Outside, the night erupted with snarling. The 4 wolves that had been watching from the tree line launched themselves toward the darker shapes pouring from the forest, and the sounds of bodies colliding, of jaws snapping, of claws tearing through fur and muscle filled the air, violent and deafening. "How many?" Soraya gasped, pressed against the wall with her arms wrapped protectively around herself. Corvin risked a glance through the shattered window. 8, maybe 10, and at least 2 archers in the trees. His jaw tightened. This is not a scouting party. This is an execution squad. Another arrow cracked through the cottage wall, splintering the wood inches from the hearth. "The back door," she said. "The river. Their wolves will run you down before you reach the water. And that poison on the arrows, nightroot extract. Even a scratch would stop your heart in minutes. Running is not an option." A howl of agony split the darkness outside. One of Corvin's wolves, she was certain. Then a second cry, cut short. 2 of their 4 defenders, gone. "We are losing," Corvin said, drawing his blade. His eyes flickered amber as his wolf pressed toward the surface. "Stay behind the hearthstone. It is the thickest wall in the cottage. Whatever happens, do not come outside." "Corvin." But he was already moving, his body twisting mid-stride as the shift took him. Where a lean, gray-haired man had stood, a massive silver wolf now crouched, its lips peeled back from teeth the length of Soraya's fingers. He launched himself through the ruined window and into the chaos beyond. Soraya crouched behind the hearthstone, alone, her back pressed against warm rock and her hands cradling the child that kicked and writhed as if trying to fight its way free. Through the shattered window she could see flashes of movement in the moonlight. Silver fur against dark, the glint of blades, the wet, terrible sounds of a battle being lost. She watched Corvin take down one of the dark wolves with a savage lunge, his jaws finding the throat. But 2 more replaced it, flanking him, driving him backward. Blood matted his silver fur. He was slowing. The remaining wolves from their side were down. Corvin was the last defender standing, and he was failing. Soraya's gaze fell to the fire poker on the floor beside her. A length of iron against trained killers with poisoned weapons. It would buy her seconds at best. But there was something else. The gift that had made her a healer was only the surface of what lived inside her. Beneath it was a deeper power, older and wilder, something her mother had warned her never to reveal. "They will call you unnatural," her mother had whispered. "Promise me you will never show them what you truly are." She had kept that promise for 23 years. Outside, Corvin yelped as a dark wolf's jaws found his hind leg. He stumbled, and the circle tightened around him. Soraya stood up. The power answered before she called it. Golden light flooded her veins, pouring through her skin until her body hummed with radiance. She stepped through the ruined doorframe into the clearing, barefoot, pregnant, incandescent. Every wolf froze. The dark wolves staggered backward, formation shattering as instinct overrode training. The light was not merely visible, it was felt, ancient and commanding, predating packs and kings and hierarchy itself. "Get away from him," she said, and her voice carried a resonance that vibrated in the bones of every creature within earshot. One of the dark wolves lunged at her. The golden light flared outward like a shockwave. The wolf was hurled sideways through the air, crashing into a birch trunk with a crack of breaking wood. It did not get up. Two more turned and bolted into the forest, their nerves shattered completely. Soraya knelt beside Corvin's bleeding wolf form and pressed her glowing hands to the gash in his leg. She felt the tissue respond, bone and muscle knitting under her palms. He stilled as the pain receded. But the effort cost her. The golden light flickered and dimmed. She had never used this much power before, and the drain was pulling at reserves she could not afford to empty. Not with the baby. A slow clap echoed across the clearing. Soraya looked up. A figure stood at the edge of the birchwood, lean and unhurried, dressed in dark leather with a short recurve bow held loosely at one side. The figure's face was hidden behind a mask carved from pale bone, shaped into the snarling visage of a wolf. "Varenth did say you might be difficult." The voice behind the mask was female, calm, almost admiring. "He did not mention you were a witch." Soraya tried to summon the light again. It guttered in her palms like a candle in a gale. Too much, too fast. She was nearly empty. The masked woman raised the bow. The arrow already nocked was black-fletched, its tip wet with nightroot. "Your child would have complicated things," the woman said, drawing the string back. "Consider this a kindness." The string released, and the world exploded. The ground beneath Soraya's feet shook as something titanic crashed through the birchwood from the north, snapping full-grown trees like dry reeds. The arrow meant for her heart was knocked aside by a wall of black fur that materialized between her and the archer, with a speed that should not have been possible for anything that size. The wolf was enormous, larger than Corvin's form by half again, its coat the black of deep water, its eyes blazing molten gold. It turned toward the masked archer with a snarl that shook bark from the surrounding trees. The woman fired again. The arrow bounced off the massive wolf's shoulder as if it had struck stone. Before she could knock another, the wolf lunged, snapping the bow like a twig and batting the blade from her hand with a single swipe. She fell backward over a root. The wolf stood over her, teeth bared. One bite and it would be over. It hesitated. Its massive head swung toward Soraya, and the fury drained from those golden eyes like water through sand. What replaced it was a recognition so absolute it transcended everything, species, language, and the 4 months of silence between them. The masked woman scrambled to her feet and fled into the darkness. The wolf did not pursue. It could not look away from Soraya. It approached her with steps so careful they seemed to cost it physical effort, as if the creature was terrified that moving too fast would cause her to vanish. When it reached her, it lowered its enormous head and pressed its nose, impossibly gently, to her swollen belly. The baby kicked, hard, twice, from opposite sides. The wolf made a sound that Soraya had never heard from any animal. A broken, keening whine that held more grief and relief and desperate love than any human voice could have contained. "Drayan," she whispered. The shift was violent. One moment the massive black wolf stood before her, trembling. The next, a man knelt in the blood-stained grass, naked from the waist up, his body marked with fresh scars and older ones she recognized from a different life. His hands hovered over her belly, shaking so badly that his fingers blurred. He looked up at her, and the Alpha King of Ashenir was weeping. Soraya had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Fury, cold command, soldiers, and chains. She had never imagined him on his knees, tears cutting tracks through the dirt and blood on his face, shaking with the effort of not reaching for her. "You are alive," he breathed. His voice was wrecked, scraped raw, as if he had been howling for months. "You are alive, and you are—" His gaze dropped to her belly. The shaking in his hands intensified. "May I?" he asked. 2 words. And they broke something in Soraya that 4 months of exile had failed to crack. Because the Alpha King, the wolf who ruled 12 packs and could shatter bone with his bare hands, was asking permission to touch his own child. She took his hand and pressed it to her stomach. The baby responded immediately, a sharp kick beneath his palm that made Draen's breath catch the sound of a man surfacing from deep water. "A child," he whispered. "Our child. Soraya, why did you not—" "Do not!" She stepped backward, pulling away from his touch. "Do not ask me why I did not tell you." Draen flinched. "Soraya, please. Corvin told you—" "I know what Corvin told me. That you were performing for Kale." Her voice cracked. "But I was there, Draen. I heard the way you said my name, like I was an item on a list, like my love was a problem you had already solved. She would never leave me." She threw his own words back like stones. "I could take 10 queens and she would still be waiting." The grief she had sealed away burst free. "Do you know what it feels like to hear the person you love reduce everything you have given them to a certainty they never had to earn?" Draen rose to his feet. Exhaustion had carved his face to the bone, dark circles like bruises beneath his eyes. "Yes," he said quietly. "I know exactly what it feels like. Because I have spent every moment since that night understanding what I did." She had expected him to defend himself. Instead, he looked at her with an honesty so naked it made her chest ache. "Corvin told you the truth. I was performing for Kale." He swallowed. "But the words I chose, the way I spoke about you, that was not strategy. That was arrogance. Real, unforgivable arrogance." Soraya stopped breathing. "I took you for granted." The words fell like a confession. "Not your love, but your presence. The fact that you were always there. I let myself believe that was permanent. And that belief made me careless with the most important person in my existence." A sob built in her throat. "I said those words because I could not conceive of a world where you would leave, and that is the cruelest thing I have ever done, because I loved you so completely that I forgot love requires more than feeling. It requires showing, every day, and I failed." The sob broke free. Soraya pressed her hand to her mouth, but it was too late. The walls she had built, the careful architecture of survival and self-protection that had kept her functioning through 4 months of exile, collapsed. "I waited for you," she choked. "Every night. I told myself I was free, and then the sun would go down and I would feel you searching for me and I could not breathe." Draen crossed the distance in 2 strides. His hands cupped her face. "I tore apart everything," he said fiercely. "Every alliance, every treaty, every relationship I had built over a decade of rule. Kale has threatened to remove me from the throne 3 times. The council thinks I have gone mad." He pressed his forehead to hers. "And I would do it again. I would burn every kingdom between here and the edge of the world if it meant standing in front of you right now. Because you are not a certainty I never had to earn, Soraya. You are a miracle I failed to deserve." Soraya's fists struck his chest. Once, twice, with no strength behind the blows. He caught her wrists and pressed her palms flat against his heartbeat. "Feel that," he whispered. "It has been beating for you since the moment we met. Only for you. There has been no one else. There will never be anyone else. And if you need me to stand here until the sun burns out repeating that truth, I will." Through his chest she felt it. Not just his heartbeat, but the bond itself, pulsing with everything he could not force into words. She believed him, not because the words were beautiful, because she could feel the truth of him, unfiltered and absolute. Flawed, arrogant, capable of breathtaking carelessness, and utterly, devastatingly devoted to her in a way that had nearly cost him his sanity. Together, she said quietly, whatever comes next, but you will never speak of my love as something you own again. Never, he swore. It is something I borrow. Every day. And every day I will earn it. He kissed her. The bond roared awake, sensation flooding through every point of contact. His months of searching crashed into her months of hiding, and where those rivers met, something new was born, fiercer than the old love, forged in separation. When they broke apart, Draen's eyes were blazing gold. The Delvanes sent assassins. They want you dead. I know. A wry, exhausted smile. Then they will learn what it costs to threaten what is ours. Corvin, healed but limping, met them at the edge of the birch wood with a scout's report that turned the night colder. Ashenir has fallen. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lord Varenth Delvane moved on the fortress 2 days ago. He had allies inside the guard, men who had been bought months before the first assassin was ever dispatched. The Elder Council has been dissolved. Varenth has declared himself regent, claiming the king has abandoned his throne. His daughter Miravel has been named queen. Draen's body went rigid beside Soraya. Through the bond, she felt his fury ignite like oil thrown on a fire, vast and consuming, and barely contained within the boundaries of his human form. The hostages? Draen asked, his voice a controlled blade. 41 members of your household staff and personal guard who refused to kneel. They are being held in the Great Hall. Varenth has announced public executions at midday tomorrow. A demonstration of what happens to those who remain loyal to a deposed king. Soraya's hand found Draen's. Thessaly, she said softly. The name of the old kitchen matron who had smuggled extra food to Soraya during her months at Ashenir, who had guessed the truth about her relationship with the king and kept the secret with a fierce maternal protectiveness. Is she among them? Corvin nodded. She refused to serve the Delvane table. Varenth had her dragged to the hall in chains. Soraya looked at Draen. We go now. Soraya, you cannot enter that fortress. If Varenth takes you, 41 people are going to die because they were loyal to you. To us. I will not hide in these mountains while Thessaly is executed for the crime of kindness. Draen studied her face for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not resignation, recognition. He was seeing her, perhaps for the first time, not as someone to be protected, but as someone who would walk through fire for the people she loved. My queen, he murmured. And the title, spoken without ceremony or politics, sounded like a vow. They rode through the night, Soraya seated before Draen on the warhorse that Corvin's scouts had brought, his arm locked around her waist, her back pressed against his chest. Behind them, a growing tide of wolves emerged from the darkness. Word had spread through the bond that the Alpha King had found his mate. They came from every ridge and valley, drawn by the pull of a connection that resonated through the pack like a struck bell. As they rode, Draen told her what the months apart had cost him, the sleepless nights pressing his hand to his mark and feeling her heartbeat faint and distant, the wolf surfacing without warning, the slow erosion of the boundary between man and beast. I dreamed of you, he said against her hair. Every night. My wolf reached for you through the bond. I thought I was going mad. I felt it, Soraya admitted. I told myself it was grief. The bond was never dead, it was screaming. His arm tightened around her. Every time your mark burned, mine answered. Some nights it was the only thing that kept me human. Dawn broke as they crested the final ridge above Ashenir. The fortress spread below them, ancient and vast, its black stone towers rising from the valley floor like the bones of some slumbering giant. Smoke trailed from the eastern quarter. The royal banner, the silver wolf on midnight blue that had flown above those walls for 11 generations, was gone. In its place flew the green serpent of House Delvain. The battle for Ashenir's outer walls lasted less than an hour. Draen's wolves overwhelmed the Delvain defenders with devastating speed, fighting with a coordination that bordered on telepathic. Soraya watched from the ridge and felt his fury through the bond, channeled into something precise and lethal. But as the sun climbed toward noon, a scout returned with news that stopped the advance cold. Lord Varenth has sealed himself inside the great hall with the hostages. He has blades at their throats. If the king breaches the doors, the executions begin immediately, starting with the kitchen matron. Soraya was moving before anyone could stop her. Through the shattered gates, past fallen bodies, until she reached the corridor where Draen stood in human form, held back by Corvin and his wolves. "You cannot go in," Corvin was saying. "It is a trap." Soraya pushed through. "Draen." He turned. "Soraya, go back. If Varenth sees you, he will see exactly what I want him to see. A pregnant woman. Unarmed. The one thing he wants more than your throne." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by horror. "No. He wants me dead because I am the proof that your bond is real, because as long as I exist, Miravel's claim to queenship is a lie. If I offer myself as a hostage in exchange for the others, he will take the trade. His ego will demand it. And then what? You will be alone in a room with a man who has already sent assassins to kill you." Soraya held his gaze. "Then you will have to trust me." Something passed between them through the bond, not words. Something deeper. A memory of every time she had been underestimated, every time her quiet strength had been mistaken for passivity, every time the woman with no bloodline and no name had proven herself equal to wolves 10 times her rank. Draen's hand covered hers on his chest. His jaw worked. His eyes blazed with the war between his need to protect her and his growing understanding that protection was not the same as partnership. "If he hurts you," Draen said, his voice barely human, "there will not be enough left of House Delvain to fill a grave." "He will not hurt me." Soraya rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, brief, fierce, laced with a promise. "Not before you reach me." She turned toward the great hall doors. "Lord Varenth," she called, her voice steady and clear. "I am Soraya, the woman your family has been trying so hard to destroy. I am coming in alone." Silence from beyond the doors. Then, muffled, a male voice. "Open the doors. Let her through." Draen made a sound behind her that was barely a word and mostly a growl, but he did not stop her. Soraya pushed the doors open and walked into the great hall of Ashenir. The scene stole the breath from her lungs. 41 hostages knelt in rows before the raised dais, their hands bound with iron chains, their faces hollow with terror and exhaustion. Armed Delvain soldiers stood behind them, blades drawn, positioned for maximum efficiency. One command and the floor would run red. On the throne sat Lord Varenth Delvain. Silver-haired, sharp-featured, dressed in ceremonial green, radiating the particular entitlement that came from centuries of accumulated power. Beside him stood Miravel, beautiful in the cold way of a woman who had been designed rather than raised. Her eyes found Soraya's belly and her lip curled. "So this is the obstacle," Miravel said. "A common healer with a swollen stomach and delusions of grandeur." Soraya ignored her. Her eyes found Thessaly among the hostages. The old woman's face was bruised, her gray hair matted with blood, but her eyes were fierce and alive and filled with something that looked like pride. "Do not do this, girl," Thessaly whispered. "Not for me. Not just for you." Soraya turned to Varenth. "You want leverage against the king. I am offering you something better than 41 servants and guards. I am offering you the Alpha King's fated mate and unborn heir. Take me. Release them." Varenth studied her with the calculating patience of a man accustomed to weighing lives on a scale. And why would you offer yourself so willingly? Because unlike your family, I understand that power means nothing if it requires the slaughter of innocents to sustain it. Very well. Varenth gestured to his soldiers. Release the hostages. Secure the healer. Father, we should kill her now, Miravel said. A dead hostage purchases nothing. A living one carrying the royal heir purchases everything. The hostages were cut free. They stumbled toward the doors, some weeping, some too dazed to comprehend their release. Thessaly resisted, trying to reach Soraya, but soldiers pushed her back with the others. As rough hands gripped Soraya's arms and forced her to her knees before the stolen throne, she felt Draen's anguish tear through the bond, like a blade drawn across exposed nerve. His rage, his terror, his desperate need to shatter those doors and reach her. But beneath all of that, she felt something stirring that had nothing to do with Draen. The baby moved, not the usual kicks and stretches she had grown accustomed to over 7 months. This was different. A warmth spreading outward from her womb, flooding her veins with a golden heat that felt ancient and impossibly vast. As if the child had been listening, as if it had been waiting, and as if it had decided, with the primal certainty of something born from a true mate bond, that no one was going to harm its mother. Golden light began to bleed through her dress, emanating from her belly in pulsing waves. Varenth's composure cracked. What is this? The light intensified, filling the great hall with a radiance that turned every shadow to nothing. This was not her healing gift. This was something inherited from a fated pair, amplified by the child that carried both their bloodlines, a power that had not manifested in the royal line for 7 generations. Pain detonated through her body. Her bones began to shift. No, she gasped, falling forward. Not here. Not now. But the transformation would not be denied. Months of suppressed change, held back by fear and grief, demanded release. The baby's magic had broken the dam. The great hall doors exploded inward. Draen burst through in full wolf form, golden eyes wild with fury. He saw Soraya on her knees, glowing, rippling with transformation. He saw Varenth reaching for a sword on the wall. He saw Miravel screaming at soldiers who were already backing away. Draen lunged toward her. Delvain soldiers threw themselves in his path. He went through them without slowing, a force of nature wrapped in black fur and burning eyes, scattering armed men like autumn leaves. But Varenth was faster than he looked. The Lord had the sword free, a ceremonial blade with a silver-white edge that gleamed with unnatural light. Moonstone steel, forged specifically to wound wolves in either form. He raised it above Soraya's convulsing body with the calm efficiency of a man who had always known this moment might come. If my daughter cannot have the throne, Varenth said coldly, then your line ends here. The blade fell. Soraya's hand caught it. Her fingers, half shifted, wrapped around the moonstone edge with impossible strength. Claws dug into the metal with a screech. Blood ran between her fingers, red laced with gold. She did not let go. No, she said, and the word shook dust from the rafters. The transformation completed in a blinding surge. Golden light exploded outward, throwing Varenth off the dais and sending soldiers crashing into walls. Where a woman had knelt, a wolf now stood. Deep bronze fur shot through with veins of gold, amber eyes burning with the intensity of a creature that had been hiding its true nature for far too long. Soraya lunged. Her jaws found Varenth's sword arm with surgical precision. The Lord screamed as bones shattered beneath her bite. The moonstone blade clattered to the floor, followed by the Lord himself, crumpling like a puppet with its strings severed. Draen reached her side. His black fur pressed against her bronze, and through the bond she felt his awe crash into her like a wave. Not just surprise, reverence. He was seeing her fully for the first time, not the quiet healer, not the hidden lover, but the wolf she had always carried within her. his equal in every way that mattered. You shifted. His voice echoed in her mind, clear as speech. Someone threatened our child, she replied. I found the motivation. His wolf made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh. My brave, impossible mate. Miravel had retrieved her father's fallen blade. She advanced toward them with the moonstone sword raised, her beautiful face twisted into something feral and unhinged. You have ruined everything, she hissed. You were supposed to be no one, a servant, a convenience, and instead, you stand here wearing a form that should have been mine. Soraya shifted back to human. The transition flowed through her with a grace that surprised her, as natural as breathing, as if her body had been waiting years for permission. She stood before her enemy with one hand resting on her belly, still whole, still carrying the child that had helped save them both. It was never supposed to be yours, Soraya said quietly. Your family tried to take all of it through poison and politics and murder. And all you proved is that a true bond cannot be broken by those who have never understood what one feels like. Miravel screamed and charged. Draen's jaws intercepted her wrist, forcing the sword free. He shifted to human, pinning her while his wolves swarmed the remaining soldiers. Miravel Delvain, Draen announced, his voice carrying the full weight of a king reclaiming his authority. You and your father are charged with treason, conspiracy to murder the true queen of Ashenir, and the attempted assassination of the royal heir. You will face judgment before every pack in the kingdom. You chose no one, Miravel spat. You never made a formal declaration. Without a choosing, I am as legitimate as she is. Draen looked at Soraya across the ruined hall, blood on his face, exhaustion carved into every line of his body, and in his eyes a love so absolute it made the torchlight seem dim by comparison. Then let me make it now. He released Miravel to his guards and walked to Soraya. He knelt. Not the kneeling of a man defeated, but the kneeling of a wolf offering himself to his mate. He tilted his head, baring his throat. Claim me, he said, in front of them all. Make it undeniable. Soraya understood. The bond needed completion, not in secret, not in shadows, not in whispered promises that could be overheard and misinterpreted. Here, in the great hall, before enemies and allies alike. She placed her hands on his shoulders. Her wolf rose inside her, guiding her as she pressed her lips to the place where his neck met his collarbone. She felt his pulse thundering beneath her mouth, felt his entire body tremble with anticipation. Her teeth sank into his flesh. The bond detonated. It was not pain. It was annihilation and creation happening simultaneously. Two souls, separated for 4 months by arrogance and fear, and the machinations of lesser wolves, crashing together with a force that rewrote the fundamental architecture of who they were. Soraya saw herself through his eyes. Not a servant, not a convenience. A woman of staggering courage who had walked into an enemy stronghold willing to die for people she barely knew. His fated mate. The one thing he knew he did not deserve. And he saw himself through hers. Not the arrogant king whose careless words had driven her into exile, but the man who had understood his failing and torn his kingdom apart, rather than accept a world without her. The man who knelt not because she demanded it, but because she was the only force in his existence worth bowing to. When she released him, they were both trembling, both weeping. My queen, Draen breathed. My king, she answered. The wolves of Ashenir howled, not in grief this time, in recognition, in completion, in the fierce, primal joy of a bond sealed at last in the light where it had always belonged. The trials were held beneath open sky, as tradition demanded. Lord Varenth Delvain faced judgment before the assembled packs, and was found guilty on every count. His execution was swift, a mercy he had never intended for others. His lands were stripped, his house dissolved, His name struck from the registry of noble bloodlines. Miravel was offered a choice: exile to the frozen reaches beyond the northern boundary, stripped of her wolf, or death. She chose exile. As she was led from the assembly in chains, she passed within arm's reach of Soraya. Their eyes met. Miravel's held nothing but cold fury. Soraya's held something worse: pity. In the weeks that followed, Ashenir healed. Crops pushed new growth through the thawing soil. Feral wolves settled back into their packs. The northern lords returned, one by one, drawn not by politics, but by the undeniable truth that pulsed through every wolf within range of the new queen's presence. The bond was real, and the kingdom had a foundation that could not be purchased, bribed, or stolen. Soraya did not become the queen anyone expected. She kept her healing practice, opening an infirmary in the fortress for any wolf regardless of rank. She spoke in council with a directness that made politicians uncomfortable and common folk adore her. She wore the claiming mark openly and never pretended to be anything other than what she was: a healer from nowhere who had loved a king badly enough to leave him and fiercely enough to come back. Drayan kept his promise. Every day, in ways both grand and unremarkable, he earned her. He told her the truth even when it was ugly. He argued with her in private and deferred to her in public when she was right, which was often. He never again spoke of her devotion as something guaranteed, and he never again assumed that love, once given, could not be taken away. And on a warm evening in late summer, as golden light poured through the windows of the royal chamber, Soraya brought their child into the world, a daughter. Dark-haired like her father, with bronze gold fur shimmering across her tiny shoulders when she cried. She shifted within minutes of being born, the smallest wolf anyone in Ashenir had ever seen, and howled until every wolf in the fortress answered. Drayan held her with hands that had torn through armies, and those hands trembled with a tenderness that cracked Soraya's heart open. "Shh, she has your stubbornness," he whispered, as the infant shifted back to human and immediately cried louder. "She refused to stay in one shape for even a moment." "She has your arrogance," Soraya replied. "She entered the world demanding everyone acknowledge her arrival." Drayan laughed, a sound she had not heard in so long that it struck her like music. He leaned down and pressed his lips to Soraya's forehead, then to the baby's, then back to Soraya's mouth. "Thank you," he said against her lips, "for leaving me, for forcing me to understand what I stood to lose, for coming back when I gave you every reason not to." Soraya touched the claiming mark on his throat, the silver scar that matched the one above her own heart. The bond hummed between them, steady and vast and permanent, woven into the fabric of their shared existence. "I did not come back because you deserved it," she said softly. "I came back because what we are together is worth more than what either of us is alone, and because our daughter deserved a father who understood that love is not something you hold. It is something you protect." Outside their window, the wolves of Ashenir lifted their voices into the evening sky. A chorus of belonging, of loyalty reclaimed, of a pack made whole by the return of its heart. And in the great tapestry of the kingdom's history, a new thread was woven into the pattern. Not the story of an alpha king who tore apart his realm for a woman who would never leave him, but the story of a woman who left and a king who learned, too late and just in time, that the only thing worth ruling was a heart freely given. She had left before dawn. She had returned with the sun, and she would never need to leave again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.